We pulled names from a hat in advance to determine the order of things, and so we'll begin with an opening statement from Ms. Hallquist.
Thank you. This next Tuesday is a referendum on our future. You know, I got into this race because I believe our national democracy is hanging by a thread, and in Vermont, we've been kicking the can down the road with our problems. So the choice is between stagnation and decline, or a compelling vision about a prosperous future. So when you take climate change, for example, Phil will tell you we have to wait for the federal government. I say we're Vermont. We can lead a North American solution to climate change. When it comes to Medicare for all, Phil Scott said in Rutland, don't turn to him. I believe Vermont can lead a union of states to get to Medicare for all. When it comes to a prosperous economy, I have a plan for the future. Phil talks about organic growth. I talk about connecting every home and business with fiber optic cable and rebuilding our downtowns. I have a very bullish vision for the future of Vermont. So I urge everyone to get out and vote next Tuesday and make a decision about your future.
Mr. Scott.
Well, thank you very much for having us tonight and for this final debate. 20 years ago, I didn't have a political bone in my body, had no interest in politics whatsoever. But I was a frustrated business owner, and I was complaining an awful lot about what they then were doing to me. So I decided to step up and serve, and I did that for a number of years in the legislature, and then as lieutenant governor, and now as governor. When I was elected governor, I issued an executive order on the first day, and it was 3 simple principles, guidelines that we focus on each and every day. To grow the economy, make Vermont more affordable, protect the most vulnerable. And again, 3 simple principles. We've accomplished a lot over the last 2 years. We didn't raise a single tax or fee. We prevented $70 million worth of property tax rate increases, $30 million less in income taxes. We removed the tax on Social Security for low and moderate income Vermonters, and we prevented a lot of other issues from happening. So we're 2 years in to where many throughout the country are serving 4-year terms. We have 2-year terms here, one of only 2 states. And I look forward to serving you over the next 2 years.
Thanks. Now to a series of questions from us, from our St. Michael students, and from some viewers. And actually, our first question picks up directly on that. The TV ads that we see that run for Mr. Scott talk a lot about holding the line on taxes and fees in his first term. Can you make that pledge going forward in 2019? And if not, where can taxpayers expect you will draw a firm line? Ms. Hallquist?
Well, I will tell you that this is a cheap trick, talking about taxes. If you look what's happening in our state, we have some serious financial issues that aren't being addressed. And we're forcing those issues down to our children's children. You know, we've got 2 major problems. Our pension problem, which amounts to about a $2.2 billion problem. But even worse yet is our unfunded health care liabilities, which are right now at $2.4 billion and growing. So if we don't address those serious issues, we're going to have serious problems down the road. Using money to basically pay down taxes as a gimmick is disrespectful to our future. I would say this has been the Republican problem nationally and the Republican problem statewide. Nationally, we're increasing our deficit by a rate we've never seen before, and in Vermont, we've just seen a downgrade. We've just seen a downgrade in terms of our credit rating. Under my leadership at the Vermont Electric Co-op, we saw credit ratings upgrades every year. It's when your credit rating goes down, you pay more to the bank, and you don't have enough for social programs.
How's that sound to you, Mr. Scott?
Well, again, I think we've accomplished a lot over the last 2 years, and we proved that you didn't have to. The knee-jerk reaction is always, you have a problem, raise a tax. And we've been doing that for too long here in Vermont, making Vermont less affordable for many families. We all know people who have moved away for better jobs and less expenses. And I believe that we need to have a future where Vermonters can keep more of what they earn. Now, again, we prevented taxes and fees from raising over the last 2 years, but as well, we had a surplus at the end of the year last year. So we proved with organic growth, we could have a better outcome. And we had a surplus of $65 million. First time in over a decade that's happened. So again, if that's trickery, if that's a gimmick, we need more gimmicks.
Mr. Scott, Democrats hold a big majority in the Vermont House and Senate, and if your party loses even a couple of seats next Tuesday, any veto from you, should you win re-election, it could be overridden. Spell out what that would mean for the state.
Well, again, I've always served in the minority. I entered public service serving in the minority, and so I don't know any better. So I've always been able to accomplish something, even with my friends on the other side of the aisle, and will continue to do so. I'll play the cards that are dealt me, but I believe there are enough independents, enough conservative Democrats as well, that appreciate that we've held the line on taxes and fees, that we've actually prioritized and invested in areas that give us the highest return. So I'll work with them. We'll get through this. But I'm still hopeful that we'll be able to continue to have at least 53 in the House to uphold a veto if I should need one.
Same question for you, Mrs. Hallquist. What does a 2/3 majority in the House and Senate mean for the state?
Well, what that means is I think we can put together a compelling and prosperous vision for our future. You know, I see the veto as a total failure in leadership. What I've heard is that Phil Scott's administration has not worked with the legislature at all. It's always been the last couple of weeks and pulling the rug out from the legislature and using vetoes. My vision is about working collaboratively with people. You've had so much more success when you work collaboratively with people and you tap into their emotional energy. You know, when you take education, for example, currently what we're doing is we're barking orders out of Montpelier, coming up with arbitrary metrics and beating up the teachers and school board. Collaborative results get you much better results. For example, Elmore and Morrisville worked together to come up with some very significant savings by working collaboratively. It wasn't forced by the state. They came up with $650,000 in savings. You get so much more when you're working collaboratively. So I think a collaborative legislature is going to get a lot more done, especially working with a collaborative leader.
Can I rebut any of that?
Yes, please.
You know, I've heard this before, and when we talk about some of the vetoes, I thought they were necessary. And I will say, over the 14 vetoes, and I tied Governor Howard Dean, and if that's failed leadership, then I would say that Governor Howard Dean failed as well as a leader, and I don't think he did. So I would mention that 9 out of the 14 bills that I did veto, I had a veto message and a path forward to trying to repair some of the issues that I saw within the bills. And we fixed those and passed them as a result. So again, working together with the legislature, when you're faced with a majority, there's checks and balances within the process. The executive branch, there's always some tension between the executive branch and the legislative branch. So I think Vermonters appreciate, and I'm not going to apologize for standing up for Vermont taxpayers.
This question is for each of you. How much does it really matter who your lieutenant governor turns out to be after Tuesday? Ms. Hallquist.
I think it's critical to have a lieutenant governor who can do a great job. Again, using all the resources you can in order to accomplish your goals. Again, I would be using the lieutenant governor to work specific programs and work collaboratively to get things done. You know, this is, again, we talk about, you know, we talk about this old model of command and control where we have to say no and we have to beat up each other and we have to fight. No, we can work collaboratively and get a lot done. You know, if you look at my leadership at Vermont Electric Cooperative, when I came to the co-op was on the edge of bankruptcy, and we had the highest rates in the state and the highest number of outages. I pulled those employees together and said, if we work shoulder to shoulder together, we can do amazing things. We went from just about junk bond status to an A+ rating with Standard & Poor's. When you talk to credit rating, most financial people would tell you that's impossible. But working together is effective, and I will use every resource available to me to get things done, including the lieutenant governor.
You've held both positions. How much does it matter?
Well, it certainly would be helpful to have someone that shared your vision. And if Don Turner is elected, I'm sure that we'll be able to work together in a collaborative fashion. I don't have a bad relationship with Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman, but we are on different sides of the political spectrum. So again, I've served in the position. I've been in opposite parties of the former governor, and I made my own way. I worked with the legislature in many different ways, trying to collaborate with the Senate, bring them together, and preside in a fair and effective way. So I was able to do that from a different party, but it's not essential. But it sure would be helpful if I had Dawn Turner at my side.
Ms. Hallquist, as you heard a moment ago, is running on her record as CEO of Vermont Electric Co-op, the state's second largest utility, which you just heard her say she helped transform from near bankruptcy to a top performer without raising electric rates for her customers, members, over the last 5 years at the helm. She's represented herself as an engineer, electrical engineer. Do you have any quarrel with that? Do you think at all times in this campaign she has, and her campaign has been truthful? Mr. Scott.
Well, I read the article. I'm not sure that she's a certified electrical engineer, but she can speak for herself. I've tried to be transparent. Everyone knows who I am. I've been through the political process, served in the Senate as lieutenant governor, now as governor, business owner my entire life, and a Vermonter my entire life. So I've tried to be honest about where I've come from and where I want to go, and that's what I believe Vermonters want.
Do you think she's been truthful?
Well, it doesn't appear, and maybe exaggerating in some instances, but I'll let her speak for herself.
Ms. Hallquist.
Yeah, I should say, first of all, I've been very clear that I'm not a degreed engineer. But if you look at my background, I'm very proud of my background. I grew up in a small town up in New York State. We had 7 kids in the family. We couldn't really afford college. I went and got an associate's degree. I went to work, started on the factory floor, and I worked my way up. And I became an engineer at Digital Equipment Corporation. It's a trade engineer. Engineer, I never said I was a professional engineer. That would be a false claim. But we use engineers. You'll see engineers in companies all across the country that have associate's degrees and have worked their way up. We certainly had many of those at Vermont Electric Co-op and in the electric utility industry. And there's no dispute when it comes to your credit rating. Moving triple B minus with a negative outlook is just above junk bond status. Junk bond is defined as bankruptcy. So I stand by our record, and I stand by the fact that the article actually discovered we were the most innovative utility in the nation. So I think everything I've said has been extremely true.
I would have to say, I think Christine is making my point about some of the failed policies of the past, the knee-jerk reaction of trying to raise taxes and fees. They downgraded us, and that was because of our demographics and our unfunded pension liabilities. This is the result of decades of underfunding and not paying and not focusing on the right areas. We need to focus on economic development. We need to prioritize that. We need to bring people into the state. We're facing a real challenge with their demographics, and I hope we get into that a little bit more because that's our biggest challenge here.
Yeah, let me say, when those demographics, what I hear is a person not taking responsibility for leadership. The leader owns the credit rating. That's absolute number one thing leaders should be doing. You should be building a plan on how to fix that credit rating. And when it comes to economic development, what Phil talks about is organic growth. What I'm talking about is connecting every home and business with fiber optic cable so Vermonters can be connected at the same speed of the cities. We are not going to get growth in rural Vermont. 2/3 of Vermonters live in rural Vermont. It is not going to happen in our copper infrastructure. I promise you.
I'm going to move
A
us on.
supermajority, Democrats leading the House, the Senate, and the governor brought us to the point we are today.
You're the leader. Take responsibility.
Oh, gosh.
I'm going to move us on now. A viewer wants to know about your support for the F-35 stealth fighter jet scheduled for deployment to the Vermont Guard base, and that's next year. 3 surrounding communities have formally objected over safety and noise. One of these jets crashed a month ago in the Carolinas, and critics note they are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Is your support for these planes as governor unwavering in all cases should you be elected, Ms. Hallquist?
Let me just say, I have some questions about the F-35. When I brought this up to the governor in the last debate, he told me I couldn't ask questions. But I have some serious questions. I would never question our congressional delegation. I'm sure they made good decisions. But I'm concerned about the significant noise levels. I'm concerned about the limited hours of testing those have gone through. And I'm concerned about using a mixed military base and civilian base for that. I have some simple questions. I think as a governor, you should allow all of your residents to ask questions. We deserve transparency. We deserve answers. As a governor, you should know that as a leader, I will get those questions answered. In the debate where we discussed this with Phil Scott, he told me, if you ask questions, it's not come here. That's not the way to lead.
That's just not the case.
Mr. Scott, is your support for these planes as governor unwavering in all cases?
Absolutely unwavering, unwavering. In fact, I took a trip down to Washington to meet with the Secretary of the Air Force, who requested that I come down and talk about Vermont, because we've been debating this issue since I was first lieutenant governor. The congressional delegation for the last 7 years has come and supported this. We've had the debate throughout, and we've come to the conclusion that it's great for Vermont and we should be welcoming the F-35. So I'm not sure what other questions you need to have answered. But when I went to Washington to meet with the Secretary of the Air Force, her one question to me was, when she took me aside, do you want the F-35 or not? Because I have 6 other states that want the F-35. So let me know today whether you want it. And that was my answer. I said, we want it. The vast majority of Vermonters want it. And we're looking forward to it landing for the first time next year.
Next question here. Last weekend we saw another senseless act of violence take place. This time it was in a synagogue in Pittsburgh. It's one of more than 50 active shooter incidents in the United States since the last election. As governor, can you protect the state from this kind of attack? What are your strategies? Mr. Scott, first to you.
Well, again, what we're seeing across the country with the polarization that's existed and is growing, the lack of civility, lack of respect is something that we should all, regardless of party, should reject. And we'll do everything we can to keep Vermont safe. We had a case here in Vermont where I thought I had needed to act. Public safety was in question. I think it's the highest priority of any government, and certainly as governor, it falls right on your shoulders. And this was the gun debate that we had, and I thought we were insulated in some way from this type of violence here in the state, but I was wrong, and I admitted that, and I took action and leadership to do that, along with the legislature. So we'll do everything we can. But we need to change the way we address things. We need to have debates with respect and civility, and we need to bring people together because it's too important.
Ms. Hallquist?
Yeah, I would say that, when it comes to the incident in Fairhaven, I think teachers and parents knew this problem existed a long time before. I'm sorry it took so long for you to recognize that we do have an issue. That said, I think one of the most important thing we can be doing now is building emotional safety in schools in our communities. When I talk about schools, I think it's really important that we make sure that schools that we teach students the value of inclusion, work towards eliminating bullying. If you look at the Fairhaven incident, the reason that was prevented is because some students spoke up. So one of the things we need to do is start working at an early age with our children and work with our adults, to start making inclusive and welcoming communities. And in addition to that, to provide mental health first aid training. That's a model that I would like to see recreated throughout the state. We focus heavily on physical first aid, but let's focus on mental first aid, because we do have a lot of issues that we're facing in our state, including substance use disorders.
Our next question, not surprisingly, deals with the state's ongoing battle against opiate addiction. A young man here at St. Michael's asked us to ask you. His name is Brendan Looney. He asked, what's next? We've done a lot. What's next? And why the slow adoption of medication-assisted treatment in Vermont prisons? Ms. Hallquist?
Yeah, let me first talk about substance use disorders and what doesn't work. We've spent $1 trillion since Richard Nixon declared the war on drugs, and we haven't changed drug use at all. But we put a lot of people in prison. What we're learning now is that the empathetic response is the correct response. And I'll give you a couple of examples of things that are working in the state that I would recreate throughout the state, and I'll add one more. I spent the afternoon in the Howard Safe Recovery Center, which was a needle exchange. That needle exchange virtually eliminated needles on the street, and it prevents heart valve transplants that amount to about 3.7 million a year. I would add a full-time nurse to that so people can get help right away when they need it. I spent the afternoon down in Rutland at the very creative community action and service center where people can go in for support. That's another model that works. I would also support the expansion of the treatment courts. Treatment courts are an alternative to prison. I spent the afternoon at Washington Treatment Court in Washington County. It works very effectively. I would also support looking at harm reduction sites as safe injection sites and start looking at that as well.
You'd be okay with safe injection sites?
I think we have to. I think this is part of the empathetic response. We know the criminalization response and the harsh response has been totally ineffective.
Mr. Scott.
I want to give credit where credit's due. Governor Shumlin brought this up in his State of the State address and said that we had a problem, and we did. We were just one of the first states to acknowledge that. After becoming elected, I wanted to continue the good work that we've been doing. We formed the Opioid Council. People from all walks of life are part of the council to see what we can do to further to respond to this crisis that we're facing. We forwarded and opened a new treatment center in St. Albans. We had a waiting list in Chittenden County of over 700 when I came into office, people waiting for treatment. With the new treatment facility, we were able to reduce that to practically nothing at this point. I appointed a drug prevention director, Jolinda LeClaire, and she's been doing some great work working with others. Project Vision down in Rutland was what really precipitated all of this. But we're working with Chittenden County and Burlington as well. So we still have a lot of work to do, but we are the model of the nation. The hub and spoke program that we have in Vermont is a model. California's following our lead. New Hampshire is right now. I went and testified in Congress over this issue, and they were all ears and listening as well. I'd love to address the METs as well. But
yeah, would you?
Sure. The METs, we're one of only 2 states that have medical assisted treatment. And this was something that that was passed in the legislature that we moved forward on. But it's been slow in implementation, but I'm proud to say that as of today, we have 650 offenders in the treatment program today. So it was difficult to start, but again, we're one of only 2 states that even offer this. So you can't flip a switch and make it happen, but they're doing some great work there.
And quickly, you didn't answer the Ms. Hallquist a bit about safe injection sites.
I'm not. I'm just not in favor of that. I think there are other treatment options at this point, and I'm just not in favor of that at this
Ms. Hallquist, you get the last
point in time.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, we're still talking about a failed system. Having people with substance use and alcohol use disorder in prison is the worst place you can put them. They aren't going to recover in prison. I spent the afternoon at the Northwest Correctional Facility with Greg, the superintendent. He will tell you that's not where people will recover. So we've got to get those people, as long as they haven't committed major crimes, we've got to get them help outside of prison.
90% felons, by the way, are incarcerated at this point in time.
On to the next question now. The October VPR Vermont PBS poll suggested 4 in 10 Vermonters do not think adequate attention is being focused on the problem of racism in the state. Do you, and how will you lead on this issue? Mr. Scott, we start with you.
Yeah, we'd like to think we're insulated from this, but we're not. Just look at the issue with Kaya Morris, who was a representative from Bennington, who chose not to run because of the racial slurs that her family had to endure. And then there was another family camp in Stowe this summer that was subjected to the same slurs. So we're not immune to this. We have to address it. We need more respect and civility. We need more diversity in this state. We did pass a law encouraging and enhancing some of the civility or some of the racial issues that we face here. And I look forward to continuing to do that because we need to be more welcoming to everyone because we need more diversity, we need more people here in the state. And I believe that immigration and accepting more refugees is part of the answer as well.
I will point out that I didn't really hear a plan there. Let me just talk about what I would do. First of all, I'm in this race because I listened to January 20th, I listened to the Muslim Girls Making Change talk about the harassment they faced in their communities. That's what made me run for office. Now, what I will do is, first of all, I will have people of color on my transition team. I will have people of color on my administration team. I will have a separate, independent commission that reviews all the data from employment, schools, and policing on what groups are targeted for discipline and how they're targeted. I would actually actively work to increase Vermont's diversity. I would use our tourist funds to attract people of color. I would also work hard to increase the diversity of our employment. I think we have to take specific actions, and I would also include ethnic studies in our schools. That would be a required curriculum of all of our schools.
Well, we're doing a lot of that, so we've already started that work with the commission that you talked about.
You vetoed the bill because you wanted this commission to report to you. I think it needs to be independent.
And then we passed the bill.
You passed it after.
You leave that part out.
After you had the commission report to you.
A constitutional problem.
Yeah, well,
you might run into if you get into it.
I'm just saying it needs to be independent from the government.
I think you should just look at the facts.
Multi-part question here. Ms. Hallquist, let's start with you. You faced death threats and personal attacks after getting the nomination. Now, after several months on the campaign trail, what have you learned about how Vermonters view the prospect of a transgender governor? And how should voters who are simply unsure about this make up their minds on Tuesday?
Well, I actually don't think it's a problem for Vermonters. I've talked to thousands of Vermonters. Vermonters will elect me on the issues. I think the biggest issue here, I have many Republicans that are calling me and saying they're voting for me, and they're saying they're voting for me because of the negative tactics that Phil and the Republican Governors Association are using. They're actually running campaign ads, and they're sending out letters that are saying things that are wholly untrue. It's clear the RGA and Phil are threatened, because when they get threatened, they go low. So I've seen incredible division and incredible fear being driven in. And one of the things I will make very clear is, I am not Peter Shumlin. So I say that because there are ads from Phil Scott and the Republican Governors Association that say, beware of Christine, she's a Peter Shumlin. This is fear and division that you and your party are using.
You say you're using the same fear and division right now because you're attaching me to the Republican Party, the National Republican Party. And I think Vermonters know me well enough that I've shown my independence throughout my political life, and I don't think they buy that.
Well, wait a minute. How can I expect you to protect me from the things that Donald Trump is doing if you can't even control your own party?
Well, I don't control the National Republican Party.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm not sure that you control the National Democratic Party either, do you?
We've been pretty positive campaign here.
Yeah, I'm sure you have.
To answer what Ms. Hallquist said, have you gone low during this campaign?
I have not. I've never run a negative campaign in my entire life. I'm not going to start now. I don't condone it. I don't think you have to do it. And I would challenge anyone to show where I've done anything negative in this campaign. I don't know if you can say the same. I have never said anything negative about you.
I'm just saying you're not taking leadership.
But you've said negative things about me, taken a lot of cheap shots. So I've never done that, and I'm not going to start today.
Well, I just think that leadership means you can lead.
And I've proven that I can lead. Thank you.
On that note, let's take a quick break now. We'll have more questions for our candidates for governor as the NBC5 gubernatorial debate continues after a short break.
Welcome back to the Vermont gubernatorial debate.
More questions now for our candidates. What do you most and least admire about President Trump? Mr. Scott.
I don't appreciate his style. I don't believe that we desperately need leaders who try and unite rather than divide. I think his tactics have proven that he's just there to win. And I'm looking for leaders that inspire us to do better. I'm very disappointed in our country and what it's inciting and where we're heading. And I think we can do better. As far as what I appreciate about him, I'll think about that and get back to you.
Ms. Hallquist.
Yeah, I think that what we have for Donald Trump, I can't say there's anything I admire about the person. You've got a person there who's clearly got, I think, serious psychological issues. I mean, is clearly a narcissist, clearly something that needs to be told all the time how good they are. They clearly need to have their ego, he needs to have his ego pumped up. It's really a terrible thing that we have happening here in terms of our leadership. And I'm just so ashamed that the National Republican Party hasn't done anything about it. It's just this again goes to my personal fear. You know, he's actually decided that he wants to eradicate my whole community. I mean, those, in 1933, one of the first people that were sent to the concentration camps were the transgender individuals. I am very afraid about the future of our country.
You're talking about the President of the United States.
Yes. Yes, I am.
What is our state's most pressing environmental challenge, Ms. Hallquist?
Our most pressing environmental challenge, I think there are two, our waterways and our climate. Our climate is a pressing challenge for the whole planet. And the waterways are an immediate threat to all of our future in terms of our economic growth and development. There's a plan. Beth Pierce wrote a good plan for how to solve the waterway issue. It requires investments. It requires strategic investment. $1 invested today saves $3 over the long term. I'm committed to make sure that's funded for the long term. When it comes to climate change, when I left Vermont Electric Co-op, we were 96% carbon free. We didn't have a rate increase for 5 years. I know we can solve climate change. It does not need to cost more money. Vermont exports $2 billion a year to the fossil fuel industry. We keep that money in state. We're going to spur innovation, create jobs. But we're not going to do it ourselves. I am committed to lead a North American solution for climate change. I've already met with the Canadian delegation. I also met with the former governor of Colorado, who has 19 states signed on to an accord. Vermont can lead in terms of solving climate change for North America.
Most pressing environmental challenge?
I would agree with Christine on this issue that our waterways, certainly Lake Champlain is the crown jewel of Vermont, and we need to make sure that we clean it up. And it didn't happen overnight, and we have a plan to do so over the next 20 to 30 years. And it's going to take commitment on all our parts to do that, and we've done that. We were able to put forth some funding to get us through the first couple of years. In fact, it was 70% more than was spent in previous administration. I'm very proud of that, and we'll continue with that. I'm committed to that. And as well, I'm committed to 90% renewables by 2050, and I think it's attainable. But 60% of our carbon emissions are from transportation, and that's why we have to start investing in our infrastructure, our charging infrastructure. We're going to be moving to electric vehicles. Elon Musk believes that will be 90% of the vehicles will be EVs, electric vehicles, within 20 years, and I believe that as well, because I've seen Harley Davidson has come out with a line of motorcycles that are electric, and that's a sign.
Vermont's only commercial landfill is in Coventry. It's outside of Newport. It's 78 acres. It's owned by Casella. The state has approved its expansion of 51 acres, which would cover about 25 more years. But some folks in the kingdom and along the Quebec border are nervous. They voiced their concern during public comment about pollutants and leachate from the landfill contaminating the drinking water and Lake Memphremagog. What do you tell them tonight?
Mr. Scott.
Let's start with, yes, Mr. Scott.
Well, I understand their concerns. It's the only landfill left in Vermont, the only viable landfill left in Vermont. When it was first initiated, it was unlined, so there was some contamination as a result. But since then, it's all been fully lined. They pump out, it's an intricate system, they pump out the contaminants and leachate and so forth on a daily basis. It's very sophisticated. The experts at the Agency of Natural Resources, the scientists and others felt that they should be moved forward. And as well, there's an Act 250 review that will have to happen at this point. But again, we need to do more in terms of recycling and composting. I believe that's the future for us as a state.
Ms. Hallquist?
Yeah, I will point out that this is a classic problem. In my work with climate change, I recognize that there's serious economic justice issues that happen. In fact, I was part of a documentary called Denial Documentary. I took the film crew to show them where the biggest polluter in the country was. It was located in the poorest part of Texas. That's what we do. We take and locate these things in poorer communities, and I think it has to stop. We need to take responsibility. I think those people have done their duty. I think we need to find an alternative site. And this is, again, a result of poor long-term planning. If you look, I went down to Brattleboro 2 weeks ago. Brattleboro is working on a digester for biosolids they will take out of their solid waste stream and out of their liquid waste stream. There are answers to this that will save our waterways and save our communities. But I do believe that they've done their duty up there. And that landfill is actually taking garbage from out of state as well. That's another one of those for-profit ventures that's creating problems for our communities.
So would you stop that if you're elected?
I would work, yes, I would. Of course, we need a place to put our landfill. I would certainly stop waste coming in from out of state, and I would find an alternative site.
Well, very difficult to cite anything of that magnitude anywhere in the state. That's why we're down to one. Secondly, it's much like our correctional facilities, very difficult to cite them. But I agree, sticking them up in the Northeast Kingdom is a problem. I mean, they are under a lot of burden, high unemployment, and economic challenges as well. And that's why I resisted the wind generation that was placed on and destroyed their mountaintops and their ridge lines. And I thought that was economic injustice as well.
Now to public education. As you both know, Vermont spends a lot more on K through 12 schools than the rest of the country, and has kept a lot of rural public schools open even in the face of declining enrollment. At the same time, we trail every other state, I believe, in terms of support for higher education, technical schools. Is this a smart way to run the railroad? Is it time to shift some of that money around? Or would you raise taxes to help fund higher ed? Ms. Hallquist?
Well, first of all, I want to point out that we are the most rural state in the union, have the most rural communities, and we're the 5th most expensive. There's a relationship between density and cost. So we aren't doing too bad a job, but I'm not going to cop out on that. I say, of course we can improve. And when you have the communities work collaboratively together, you can get better results. Doing dictates from the state is the wrong thing to do. We've got to work closely with the communities. But we can also provide wraparound services to those schools. If you look at the designated agencies and the other mental health support agencies, they're located in separate facilities. We can optimize those schools and make them better. Now, I will say the most important thing is let's break this assumption that we're going to have less and less kids. I know, because we've done it in other parts of this country, that when we connect every home and business with fiber, we will grow our rural communities. We will add people, jobs will come. The reason we're declining, we're seeing the same thing we saw in the 1930s when the cities had electricity and rural America did not. Today it's the digital divide, and I have a plan to fix that.
30,000 fewer students than we had 20 years ago. That's our problem. We're educating around 75,000 students in K through 12. We're spending about $1.7 billion to do so, making us one of the highest per pupil spending in the country. So we have to do something different. My plan would be to invest more in early care and learning, because we spend this much. 90% of the $1.7 billion is for K through 12. We spend 5% or less for early care and learning, and we spend 5% or less for higher education. What we should be doing is not spending more money, but reprioritizing that money and investing earlier, because we know the child's brain develops immensely fast, 0 to 5. So we need to invest earlier for better outcomes for them and for us. In the meantime, we're going to have to do whatever we can. We've heard the screams of relief from property taxes, and we've heard that for over a decade, 2 decades, and we need to come to their aid. Vermonters can't afford anymore.
Let me also make another point here. First of all, I think the property tax system is a flawed model. I would move to a more income-based system. If you look at the property tax system, even corrected for the homestead deduction, the wealthy people aren't paying their share. I think we need to have a system that allows everybody to pay their equal share. More importantly, moving to a more of an income-based system allows some of the elderly and fixed income people to stay in their homes.
That would just come out of a different pocket. If you're not going to address the spending side, then you're just taking money out of the other pocket. So someone's going to pay. What we need to do is have the courage to anticipate and develop a new system.
Let's talk about those 2 Vermonts. Chittenden County is the economic engine, while a lot of the rest of Vermont is struggling to hold on to people and hold on to jobs. Ms. Hallquist says fiber optic line delivering super fast connectivity to every town is the ticket to revitalizing the rural economy. Now, how realistic, how affordable, what other ideas do you have? Mr. Scott, you're up first.
Well, again, the 2 previous governors have promised cell service and high-speed internet access to all areas of the state. The good news is we're about 93% covered, but admittedly not high speed in every case. But you'd be surprised to learn that the highest capacity, the highest speeds in the state are in places like Brattleboro, Springfield, Newport, Bennington, and as well high speed in Rochester and Hancock, and not exactly thriving economic centers in our state. They're suffering. They're outside of the Chittenden County bubble. So it's not the entire answer. It's part of the answer. It's another economic tool in the toolbox. And I believe technology is changing right before our eyes, and we need to address it. But we're doing that by investing more in downtowns and making sure that they have access to broadband and high-speed access to broadband in those downtowns, because the millennials want to live there. So we need to continue to work in that fashion.
Well, let me just tell you, in those towns, fiber doesn't come to every home and business. And what I'm talking about is most of Vermont is on a rotting copper infrastructure. And I will tell you why this is such a good idea and why it's so inexpensive and why it's cheaper than we're doing it today. And we've done this. I urge anybody to Google electric cooperatives fiber optic cable. You're going to see it's happening in 60 other places in this country. When you have the electric utility hang the fiber in the electric space with their poles and equipment, you cut the cost by more than 1/2. The electric utility can borrow and pay back over a 30-year period versus 15-year periods for telecom facilities. And electric utilities can borrow at a much less rate. So now you cut it by more than 75%. You've reduced that cost so much that you can get it to every home and business in Vermont. I want to remind you, we did this in the 30s when we didn't have electricity. So, and that fiber, by the way, will be open access at the home. The electric utility owns the fiber to the home, but then you can have any provider use it. So this answer works. I encourage you to research it. I am very bullish about Vermont.
It begs the question, with Christine at the helm of Vermont Electric Co-op, why didn't they do it? If it was a great thing,
you should understand, I was starting to hand the co-op down. Then I became governor. There's a new technology. There's a technology enhancement that's happened in the last 5 years that's allowed this to happen. It used to be you had to splice the fiber in a trailer. Now they have portable splices that go up in the bucket. So nationally, we did this in other areas in the country, and I was on the national committee that oversaw that. And of course, I always like it when someone else does it first. So I was just introducing this to the co-op when I decided to run for governor. Now I'll do it for the state.
Let's talk about a big issue the state has faced for a number of years now. Vermont's birth rate is near an all-time low. That's one of the arguments for a paid family leave program that the legislature has been considering. Now, the latest VPR PBS poll found clear support for the idea of a $70 a year tax on a typical worker, which would create a fund to replace lost pay when a parent took time off to care for a new baby. The question is, would this make the state more attractive to those starting a family? Ms. Hallquist, we'll start with you.
I will say that, when it comes to things like this is called being a civilized society. Most larger companies provide that already. Unfortunately, the way things are today, because people aren't making a living wage, our parents are working 2 or 3 jobs. This is a civilized thing to do. I don't think we should be talking about how much it costs. I think we should talk about our parents that are working 2 or 3 jobs. If you adjust the minimum wage for inflation since the late 60s, it'd be $22 an hour right now. When I ask people, what does it cost to live in a 2-bedroom home in the state, it's $22 an hour. So we're at this place where people can't make a living wage. We absolutely should do this. This is one of the bills that Phil Scott vetoed, along with the raise in the minimum wage, along with a bill that would have made polluters pay, along with a bill that would have protected our children from toxic and toys.
House Bill 196, right? Why not support that?
Well, it had a tax in it, a payroll tax. And I said that we didn't need to raise any taxes in the state. Vermonters had enough. I'm not averse to have a paid family leave, but I think it should be done on a voluntary basis. New Hampshire is considering the same right now. I look forward to working with them. Maybe there's something we can do together in terms of broadening the pool. Now, having said that, the Joint Fiscal Office of the legislature had said this is severely underfunded. That's not enough money. It's not going to take care of the problem. And it was almost like the camel's nose under the tent. Once you enact the tax, the payroll tax, it might sound like a little bit now, but that would grow significantly from their standpoint, not from what I said, but what they said. So again, I think we need to go in with our eyes wide open that it would be severely underfunded, and then determine who's going to get it. Just for families having kids, and then, or is it extended to others as well?
Can I point out that we already have a voluntary program because a lot of companies offer that?
You knew we wouldn't get through tonight without a question about marijuana. In an earlier debate, Governor Scott said he would reject a bill to establish a tax and regulate a retail pot model for marijuana in Vermont until there is a roadside test for cannabis impairment. We don't know when that might be. Ms. Hallquist has said she'd sign a bill into law if she's elected. What does she not see coming?
Well, again, it's about want and need. I mean, do we need it or do we want it? I know some have said that this is the answer to all our economic woes. I don't believe it is. And I think we have an opportunity to do it right. If we're going to do it, I'm not saying never. In fact, I signed the pot bill that we have now. And so, but a tax and regulate system is so much different. And until we address some of the educational needs that we have in terms of making sure that the kids understand what this means, as well dealing with the edibles, as well dealing with highway impairment. Now, we can watch some other states who are struggling through this. Massachusetts is now moving forward. Maine is moving forward. Canada's moved forward. So we can learn from them, and if we want to move forward with this, let's do it right, and again with our eyes wide open, and make sure that we keep those on our highways safe, not just from marijuana impairment, but from opioids and heroin and alcohol and a combination of all of them.
Ms. Hallquist.
Yes, I want to point out from a safety standpoint, we're in the most dangerous place right now. People don't know where their marijuana is coming from. They don't know what it's grown with. They don't know what it's sprayed with. Worse yet, like we've seen in New York State, it could be cut with other substances, including fentanyl. So what we've done is we've created a wonderful opportunity for the black market in Vermont. And there are many states and many countries around us that have recognized that and gone to full tax and regulate. It's a safety issue. This safety issue far outrides the danger of motor vehicle handling, because you can stop somebody who's not driving properly. I say it's an urgent safety issue and we need to move as quickly as possible. I'm not arguing this from a revenue standpoint. There will be revenues that come from it, but we are in a very dangerous place right now.
I think you're naive to think that it's going to eliminate the black market. I've had people come to me and tell me that you can legalize if you want, but you're not going to charge me 25% more. I'm still going to buy it from where I bought it before.
Let's move to a quick lightning round. Time is really short. Real short answers, please. A sentence, if you could. Ms. Hallquist, when did you last attend a service in a house of worship?
Well, 2 Sundays ago.
Mr. Scott.
It was the service for John McCain at the National Cathedral.
When you're not working, when you're in the privacy of your home, what do you most often hear your spouse nag you about or wish you would do, Mr. Scott?
Never nags. She never nags. She might have a list of things that I should do that I look forward to doing. I enjoy working outside. I enjoy seeing productivity. Actually, if you mow the lawn, you can see the results of that in a pretty quick period of time, whereas with legislation, it takes a while.
No nagging. Wow,
No.
She's special. Okay, and Ms. Hallquist.
Well, I have a habit of not closing the cupboards. It's been a lifelong problem. I wouldn't call it a nag. I would call it a reminder.
I think we're ready for the closing statements now.
Yes, we're going to move on to closings.
Are we out of time? Okay, well, thank you. Time now for our closing statements. You each have a minute as before. And Mr. Scott, you're up first.
Well, I hope everyone gets out to vote, first of all. Exercise your right. So many have fought for that right, and we need to make sure that we show up, regardless of who you're going to vote for. I believe that political polarization is the biggest threat to our country right now, and we have to rise above this. We're going to have to remember what brings us together as Vermonters, as Americans, and reject all the ills that are happening throughout society today. And it's about being better role models. Each and every one of us has an opportunity to do that, to be leaders, because our kids are watching us, and we need to make sure that we do everything we can to make sure that Vermont is protected and that we adhere to the values of our country in terms of independence and tolerance and compassion.
Ms. Hallquist.
Well, one thing I'm proud of, I think Vermonters have a very clear decision to make next Tuesday. They have a decision. If you want to keep things the way they are, you're going to vote for Phil Scott. But if you want to have somebody who's got a compelling vision about a prosperous future, I'll take you down that road. I'm very bullish about the future of Vermont. We're the safest state. We have the highest education performance. We're the healthiest state. We have awesome outdoor recreation, and we have pretty awesome people. That is a formula for tremendous growth in rural Vermont. 2/3 of Vermont lives in rural Vermont. I know we can solve climate change. We're gonna lead the North American solution for climate change because we can. That's who Vermont is. Vermont's a place where we know we're a small state and we can do great things. And I will also lead us down to get a solution to get to Medicare for all by organizing with other states. This isn't the hardest thing I've ever done. Certainly, if you look at my leadership at the Vermont Electric Co-op, I've got a demonstrated leadership of incredible success. And nothing is impossible when you're on the side of justice.
Thank you both. A reminder that NBC5 News will have full election coverage through Tuesday night, no matter how late it might go.
And make sure you download our app and sign up for alerts to get updates and results as they come in.
And please get out and vote. For all of us at NBC5, thanks for joining us tonight. Good night.